Welcome. Yay, thank you for coming. This is going to be a sort of crash course in producing specifically for indie theater. So if you're, hoping to go and do stuff at Mirvish, this isn't going to help you. But if you want to put on a show for the first or second time and you don't know where to start, hopefully this will be helpful to you. I guess we can talk about ourselves a little bit. Yeah. So my name's Emily Dix. I've been working in theater for about 15 years. I've been singing for almost 9 years. I run Bygone Theater. It's a company that I started in 2012. Conor is currentently our chair for that. That's a company that does shows that are written or set in the early mid 20th century. I also started up the TITC. It's a concept I had several years ago, but we officially got started like a year and a half ago. We'll talk about it in a moment. And then as a producer, I've worked with Tarragon Theater, Theater 20, Crow's Theater, and have done mostly a lot of independent producing and some work in film and TV as well, which has sort of helped build some budget skills, worked for the city in finance for some years, which helped with that sort of stuff as well. So that's where I'm coming from.
I'm Conor. I was raised in Edmonton, moved out here about 6 years ago now after going to business school. So I focused in finance and marketing in my education. After coming here, I did some sales, but then also worked in film and television in development and producing. So I have been a producer, assistant producer, production coordinator, PA. I've done everything in film and have managed budgets, created budgets, attended international markets to sell series, done financing agreements, all that jazz.
Pretty exciting stuff.
And I'm currently doing an MBA and a law degree with the same motives in mind to enhance my knowledge and keep going in that direction. So that's me.
You just made yourself sound so much more qualified than me.
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk about the TITC a little bit. So basically, the core concept of the Toronto Independent Theatre Coalition is that all of these little indie companies that exist in Toronto need to be working together. There are over 300 indie companies in the city. Off the top of your head, probably all of us can name maybe 10 of them. There is this strange sense of competition that seems to exist that I don't understand. I think it maybe comes out of some theater school programs where if you're trained as an actor initially, you're like, I've got to beat everybody else out. But that's not going to help the community thrive. It's not going to help any of the individual groups thrive. So the TITC was started with the idea that if all of these little companies pooled their resources, we could do bigger and better things. I've found that basically every little group that you find has at least one person who has got some amazing talent or experience, but we all get stretched so thin because you are like, I want to do this thing, and you start out on your own instead of looking for like-minded people who are already doing the same kind of thing and saying, how can we do this together? So the point is to have all of these groups help share resources, share their knowledge, and most importantly, share their markets. Because the biggest problem that seems to be facing all of us is money. It's hard to get. It's an incredibly expensive city to live and work in. But the way that larger theater companies thrive is by getting like sponsors and donations. And that's something that's really hard to do when you're a tiny group of people that don't have a venue. So by coming together, if all of our groups say, okay, well, we've got 500 Facebook followers, oh, you've got 700, oh, you've got 30, whatever it is, we all come together and share everybody's production info. Through those, the market gets expanded. And then we can go to sponsors and say, well, yes, we're a small company that's starting out, but look at this support network that we have. So you can learn more about this on our website, which is the titc.ca. I was going to pull it up, but I don't know how to do that apparently. It goes into everything there. It shows our current member companies, talks about our mandate, our code of conduct, which is something that's very important. And there's also a link. It's fine. We don't have to show it. You can, the thing is there. We can go to it after. But yeah, that's the TITC.ca. And through there, you can also find a link to Stage Door Toronto, which is sort of an offshoot. It's like a blog that has reviews of local shows, little top 5 things. It's just, it's like a little theater blog specifically for Toronto indie theater. So we're trying to keep it really focused. And if you ever have anything you want posted on there, or anything you want to see on there, let us know. Or if you want to write something, because currently I'm just doing all these. So.
And I guess finally, you on the TITC website, you can see there's 2 membership applications. One if you're a company, one if you're an individual. Great way to get involved. It'll get you onto the Facebook page where we post a lot of stuff.
Yep.
So this webinar, I guess, is what you call these things. We're just going to give mostly a broad overview of what a producer is and give some insights into some of the more specific duties. So first we'll do an overview of the roles and responsibilities, and we'll talk about assembling a team, what to look for when you're, how to find a team that really brings everybody together. We'll talk briefly about marketing, selling a show, what that really entails, some of the duties that happen after the show. I'll give a quick overview of the contracts. I'll let you know right now that I'm not going to go too in depth in that document that we shared with you. It's a contract that I've written that we use for most of our shows now. I think what we'd rather do is invite you to take a look at it during that section, and during the Q&A section, if there's anything that you really want to ask questions about, then we can do it then. Emily will then go through typical schedules, seeing when everything should happen, which is one of the most overlooked but important parts of producing. And then finally, we'll go through budgets and that budget template. This won't really get too much into funding, fundraising, grants, anything like that, because it's just too big of a topic. And we thought that just by giving an overview, it would do it disservice. So this is more about setting up and running a production.
Yeah. And for anyone who's joined recently, you should see in the chat there a link to a Dropbox file where you can find that draft contract, the Excel budget, the PDF of this, and a thing explaining the TITC in general. Okay.
So what is a producer? Just generally. A producer is the manager of a production. So you can think, I always think of it in business terms. So I think of a producer as, you know, the top management, the person who's actually on the ground. So maybe not a CEO, that might be an executive producer, but somebody who's definitely has a hand in things. So in being a manager, you have to be organized. You have to build the team. It's your job to bring in the people who are going to actually do the work and to delegate to them in a way that effectively builds cohesion. You have to manage, write all the contracts, both incoming and outgoing. You are kind of the last line of defense for conflicts. If things elevate, then you have to be able to solve those without engaging with the conflict itself. You have to create and manage the budget. And these last two, putting on a positive face, is really about not showing that things are going wrong, because they will. It's indie theater, and there's always going to be problems. And it's really the producer's job to make sure that everybody just feels like things are going well, or at least that there's a light to the end of the tunnel, that everything's going.
The only thing that didn't happen here in scene 2 and 3, what's missing?
This leg. I rest.
Sorry, whoever just joined, if you could just mute your audio.
Oh, you're in the demo mode, right?
No, I don't think so. I borrowed this off someone. I think it's...
Oh, okay. Cool. What are you doing?
Hi. If whoever just joined could...
I think they did. Perfect.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thank
you.
And that comes into empowering and encouraging. So if you are the light, if you're the one who's saying that we're always, everything's solvable, everything's happening, and not to worry about it, it's going to empower people to do their best job. And by delegating effectively, then you're also going to make them know that they actually have a hand in affecting that.
That said, it doesn't mean you're lying to them. Don't just like, don't pretend nothing's wrong and that like the set fell apart and you're going to just try and hide that and not tell them. It's more about being a problem solver instead of, you shouldn't be going to them and being like, oh my God, this is wrong and this is wrong, and stressing everybody out. When someone comes to you with a problem, you say, that's okay, this is how we're going to fix it. So keeping it positive, but still be transparent. There's some things a producer should not do. That's micromanage the team. It can be difficult, especially if you're used to working really small shows like I am, to not be trying to get your hands in every single thing and saying to the designer, oh, you should be doing it this way, and set designer, you should be doing it this way. You need to trust your team. So right at the beginning, whether you decide to have a group of 10 people working on a show or it's you and one other person, you need to know what your roles are and you need to let people do their job. You shouldn't be taking creative control. And sometimes in a small show, you may find that you're working as a producer and you have a creative role as well. And then it's really important to try and separate those two things, because maybe as the designer, you do get a final say on some things, but you don't get to come in as a producer and then try and control that, right? You have to let the creatives do their work and realize that you're basically there to help all of the creatives recognize their vision. Don't let emotions rule over reason. I mean, hopefully everybody in the group would try and do that, but you as the producer especially need to make sure that you kind of take a step back. And this can be hard if you're working with friends and something goes wrong, but you need to be the grown up there basically to kind of come out and be like, this is how we're going to fix things. Along with that, don't pit people against each other. Maybe you're working and your set designer is your best friend and you hire a costume designer and then you don't really like the costume designer. And so you start trying to cause little problems. It sounds really childish and ridiculous, but I've seen it happen in so many productions. Don't do that. Make sure you recognize everybody's skills and authority, and you, again, keep your emotion out of that. And that don't diminish your own authority. As the producer, you are above the director and the designer. It can be hard, especially with directors who feel like it's their show, and to an extent it is, but you are still above them and you still need to sort of rein them in if they need reining in. So don't let yourself be pushed around. If you're somebody who has trouble taking a leadership role, producing is probably not the right thing for you. And on top of that, making sure that you don't let the director or any creative lead make choices that really should be the responsibility of the producer. Make sure you know what your role is, what their role is, and sometimes you are going to have to be like, nope, I'm the one in charge. You don't get to choose that. I do. Assembling a team, finding the right fit. Okay, so how do you put together a production team? There's a few things you want to consider outside of who are my friends that I want to do a show with. I think the main things are experience, personality types, diversity, and availability. So experience is an obvious one. You want to work with people who know what they're doing. That said, there are times when it can be fine to work with someone who hasn't done something before. With Bygone, with stage management in particular, we often hire people who haven't stage managed before. The reason for that is we have a really tight budget. We know we can't afford to pay a stage manager what they should be paid, but I have considerable stage management experience. So we bring on somebody who's new and say, we're going to teach you. We're going to let you be the one in charge and make the decisions. But I kind of shadow them to make sure nothing goes wrong. And they get a chance to run a reasonably large show by themselves. So you might have things like that. If you don't have that kind of opportunity, obviously you want to go for the most experienced person you can get. Someone who also sees the vision that you or the producer or the director rather has and can help fulfill that. Personality types. You need to be able to get along with people. You don't have to work with your friends. Sometimes it's bad to work with your friends, but you need people who can mesh. So don't hire someone just off a resume. Make sure you go and talk to them And it doesn't have to be a super formal interview. You can go out for coffee and chat. And don't feel like just because you've reached out to a person, started talking to them, that you have to work with them. If you have a meeting and after go, I don't know if it would work, don't work with them. That's fine. Just be upfront about what you're looking for, and don't make choices just because you feel like it would be awkward if you don't do something. That's going to just lead to trouble down the line. Diversity obviously is something that comes up a lot now, and it is a tricky topic that we're not going to go into too much. The main thing I'm going to say is there's a difference between diversity and tokenism. The worst thing you can do is have a group together and say, oh shoot, we're all a bunch of white people, we need to go and hire somebody who's a visible minority, and go looking for someone just to try and show that you're diverse. The reason you want diversity is because the more diverse a group you have, the more diverse experiences you have. You're going to meet people who come from a different background than you, who have had different problems, different good things happen, have just a different viewpoint, which will help you see things on a grander scale. As a producer, you need to be able to kind of have a nice overview of things, but no matter how experienced you are, you're still coming at it with your own personal background and experience. So there's always going to be a limit to it. But if you start working with people who come from different backgrounds, they've got that little circle too, and you can learn from it and work together, and it's great. So something to keep in mind. When it comes to diversity in terms of any sort of disability or anything as well, it's important to put out there what kind of things are required from the position. And if it's something that can reasonably be done if you are physically disabled, or if it can't be. The show we did, Rear Window, recently, actually the lead was someone in a wheelchair. So we did look and see if there was anyone who was, it was supposed to be someone with a broken leg. But that was one that we advertised, hey, we actually have a space where we could have a disabled actor in that role. When it comes to stuff like non-visible disabilities, I have an anxiety disorder. I always let everyone I work with know that I have that, and let them know if something like that is a problem for you. You know, this is a job you can do at home where you don't have to go out, you don't have to work with people. That's great. If we have one where it involves you going door to door or calling people, that's something somebody needs to know about ahead of time so that they can decide if that's something that'll work for them. Finally, availability is one of the main things. You need to know before you reach out to anybody what their time commitment is going to be. And not just like the run of the show, but sort of like, well, when we need you, when the deadlines will be, how much time you're expected to put in on a weekly basis. Be upfront about that. Even if it seems like a lot of time, it's always better to say to somebody, okay, we need a lot from you, can you do this? Than to pretend like, oh, it'll be easy, we just need this, and then you throw stuff at them. So make sure you consider all of those things when you're looking to put together a team.
Just before we go on, we welcome we are going to have a Q&A after. If you have questions that you think of during, feel free to put them in the chat. If they're urgent, then we'll try to answer them as we go. Otherwise, we'll address everything at the end. Okay. So I'll get a little bit into marketing, at getting bums in seats. Probably the thing that people think about the most. Unfortunately, there's not really a science to marketing, despite what my marketing professors told me for 4 years. But the things that you can do that can make you successful, especially in small scale things like this, when you don't necessarily have a lot of money, is to do your market research. And that starts with asking why you're doing it. It's fine to do a show for many reasons. That can be artistic, that can be to make a political or social point, or that could be for money. You could accept losses, you could accept any number of things, but you have to have that initial goal of why am I doing this right at the outset, because that will influence every decision you make afterwards. Once you decide that, then you have to look at who might be interested in seeing this. Think about like items, other shows that have happened that are similar, that are at a bigger scale, television shows, social networks, social events, anything like that. There are tools that you can use to get info on markets. And for example, the Toronto Arts Council, Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council all put out reports.
TAPA.
TAPA also puts out a report about what's happening in the arts and in theater, what people are seeing, how audiences trend, what sorts of things that they're going to, where they're spending their money. From what you can do, Facebook is actually a very good tool. You can go into the business manager section. You don't have to have a business account to do this. You can go into it and you can put in search terms. For example, if you, in Rear Window, when I was trying to find out who might be going in Toronto to this show, I searched Hitchcock, I searched film, I searched people who are going to the Review Cinema, I searched people who are
like vintage things.
Interested, in vintage things, and of course in theater. And you lump those all together, and it's going to give you a subsect of people. It's going to tell you whether they're primarily male or female, what sorts of things that they do. Obviously, these are not, it's not as good as primary research where you actually go out and find information. You should be taking information as much as you can from your audiences. But in general, getting this idea of who is actually might be interested in it will allow you to target advertising to the people who will come. It's not true that theater goers will go to every show. It's not true that non-theater goers won't go to a show. You know, people will go to things that they're interested in, and it's about communication. And that is the essence of marketing, is communicating a message. And once you know why and who, then that becomes a lot easier.
And just to tag on that, the one thing I would caution with some of the research that has been done, that was definitely with larger scale things. And also it's a good basis, but some of those studies are from a couple years ago. So you do also have to be really aware of just what's happening in life. You know, obviously COVID is a big thing now. We had a show planned for the fall that, aside from the fact that, you know, theaters might not be open, it's now something I'm reconsidering because it was kind of a downer. And we thought, are people going to want to go and see something that's kind of heavy, that's not related to something we've just gone through, but that's not going to make you feel good? Maybe it's better for us to do a comedy then, or even a thriller, and think of some escapism. So you have to be really aware of the stuff that's happening on a broad scale like that, and follow the stuff that is happening in trends like fashion, what big movies are coming out that year. You know, the year that The Great Gatsby came out was the year that we did Rope, set in the 1920s, because I knew there was going to be lots of 20s fashion out there, and 20s music and everything.
And that's primarily because we as a company with Bygone have been mostly concerned with a more commercial approach, and that is we want people to see our shows. If you're a bit more, if
you've just joined, if you could just mute your mic, please. Thank you.
So then getting onto how you actually do the marketing, obviously word of mouth is still the number one, and the best way to do that is to make a good show, and people will talk about it, but also getting reviewers out. If you can, I know it's hard, but I'll talk about that in a second. Using Facebook ads, you can use obviously it's more productive if you have people organically sharing, but spending $100 or $200 on online advertising gets that targeted group that I talked about in the first section. Obviously, the more you can spend, the better. I know somebody who works exclusively in social media advertising, and his recommendation was to be able to spend $100 a week to really develop a market. I know that's not possible for a lot of indie producers, but marketing is one of those budget line items that people put off, and it's actually one of the most important things. So make sure that you have a marketing budget. Print is a little bit less important nowadays, but still having posters, having programs, those things are not just for your audience and not just for marketing, but can also be things that you can sell to a potential sponsor. They like to see their logo on something, and it's a good way of potentially being able to generate income that way.
And it depends on what you think you're, sorry, that's my puppy whining. If people hear things, she's going to appear now. This is Francis. Stop it. Depending on what sort of demographic you're looking at, if you tend to get older people coming out to your shows, print's probably more important. If you have, you know, people who have kids or something, and so you're doing a kids show, print and blogs and things will be more important. So you have to know how different demographics get their information and make sure that you come into that. You're getting out of frame here. We'll come back
so publicity is the last thing. Now it's actually quite important, and it's generally free if you do it yourself. So the importance of press releases, every show should have a press release that describes to the media what your show is. And Emily will talk a bit more about that in the scheduling portion. But also reaching out to get articles if you can. If it's a social topic, then that's something that you can press, that if it's relevant to what people care about, then you should be reaching out to different journalists in the area. I know that in theater, it's becoming very, very, the big publications don't have many theater writers, but even small ones like Stage Door TO, having something that you can share on social media is great.
Yeah.
Some people ask whether or not hiring a publicist is worthwhile. They're going to do a lot of that legwork that you can do anyway. From experience, publicists for small productions like this generally cost around $3,000. And that's not usually a cost that I think is worthwhile unless you're doing a longer run. They'll usually have a direct line to a lot of these journalists and stuff and might be able to cut the line, but they're not doing anything different than what you can do just by picking up a phone and calling the journalists and saying, like, listen, we really like your writing, we really like your publication, and we'd love for you to come out. We think that this would really speak to your readers. But again, anything that you do in communication should be targeted towards, one, not lying, but also communicating a message. So you have to link it to a some value. So if a journalist wants readers, then you have to show how their readers are going to benefit from an article about this.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that just being a small Canadian company that's doing it by themselves is not going to cut it. That's what we all are. So you need to take some time and look at what these people have written about and why. And some of them you will probably notice were there because it's been paid things. There'll be some that are obviously done because the newspaper has picked in and like, this is going to make money. So look up some of the smaller companies that have gotten notice and see why that is. I'm also just going to throw out there quick. Another great one is Stageworthy, the podcast. Phil does a great little podcast that's, he talks about shows you're doing. He'll just talk about what it's like working in theater. That's another thing to look into, blogs and podcasts. This is me. Yeah. After the show, the wind down. So now I think a lot of theater producers come into producing from an acting background. So if you're used to acting and having a show being done and being like, great, I can wash my hands, then this part's probably going to be a little difficult for you, because just because the show is closed doesn't mean your job is over. So a quick rundown of the things that will happen. Your wrap up, there's the strike. You need to clear out of the theater. Someone needs to be in charge of that. Now, if you're lucky, you have a production manager or production stage manager, and that's probably their job. It's still your job to make sure that they're doing that. You need to plan everything from who is going to take the stuff out. Do we need to rent a truck? Are we old enough to rent a truck? I think you have to be 25. When we started Bygone, that was a problem for me, finding somebody who could drive in Toronto, who was willing to drive a truck and could get the insurance to do that. Where are you going to put the stuff after? If you're throwing it out, where you can throw it out. Don't assume that the venue has a garbage that you can use for anything larger than a coffee cup. There can be costs associated with that as well. Hopefully you're not just throwing stuff out. You know, if you're going to donate things, if you have any way of selling any of this stuff, what you're going to do with the money that comes back from that, you have to plan all of that. If there's things that need to be returned, rentals and things, getting that back in a timely manner. Not just if it's something that you paid and need to get back, but if someone was kind enough to lend you something, making sure you get that back to them on time. And then, of course, thanking everybody. In indie theater, there's never a lot of money to go around. You need to thank people, and like over and over. Let them know how much you appreciate the work they put in. Be specific. I always write a card for every person who's involved in the show, and I say something specific, not just like, thanks for being involved, but you did this thing that was great, and it helped me in this way, and this is why I love you for it, kind of thing. It does make a big difference. So make sure you thank people. If you can, give them some kind of gift. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Giving someone a flower on opening night or closing night, or a little bottle of champagne or whatever, it just shows them that they're appreciated, and it puts people in a good mood. And you want everyone in a good mood, because it's a lot of work for honestly very little return most of the time. So you need to make sure people are feeling good. Then you get into your accounting. So after you're out of the venue and that's all wrapped up, you need to look back at your budget. This is something you should have been updating throughout the entire process. So hopefully all you're doing is sort of inputting your final ticket sales, making sure you've got all of your receipts together, everything's matching up. If you had people, if you were actually giving money to like your crew to go and buy things, making sure that they have submitted all of their receipts, and that you've got everything nice and organized. We'll go into that a bit more later. Getting your final ticket numbers. If you're at a larger venue, it may take them a couple weeks to give you the final numbers, but making sure you know exactly how many tickets were sold each night, how many comps were there and everything, and doing all of your reconciliation, which we'll get into when we look at the budget. And finally, profit shares. If you have entered into something where everyone is being paid via profit share, make sure that they know within a couple days if they're getting paid, how much money it'll be. Make sure you explain it one way or another, and don't let it be a surprise. You know, I think we usually know. So you put on a show and ticket sales aren't going great. You don't have to be a downer about it and remind everybody, but like make sure everyone has an idea going in and knows, okay, if we're selling 50% of the house every day, everyone's going to make a few $100. Great. So they aren't planning on something and then maybe not getting it. And then make sure you've got their information to pay them, however it may be, if it's via check or e-transfer or what have you, and that you get something back saying that, yes, they were paid. And finally, pay them regardless of how much money it is. When the first profit share we did was with Rope back in 2014, and everyone got $7.28, which they graciously donate back to the company. But you know, it was a small profit, but it was a profit, and it's important to recognize that. Don't be like, oh, well, it's, you know, it's just nothing, so I'm not going to bother. Let people know, you know, just be transparent with everything. And that goes into the collectives and sharing information. Regardless of how you're structured, you should be letting your team know sort of the final outcome, and along with your thank yous being like, you know, this is how we sold, and we were happy with this or weren't happy. If you're doing a collective, like the equity collective agreement, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen now, you really have to share that stuff. You should be sharing the budget and the reconciliation sheet. We put together a package that includes all those broken down, and then has like a summary page. So if it's people that aren't really producer types and they don't care to go through all the details, they can see, oh, this is how many tickets were sold. This is what we projected would happen. This is what actually happened. This is who's getting paid what, all of that sort of stuff. And finally, if you're dealing with unions, there will be some paperwork that you need to submit afterwards as well. And sponsors may also want to know specifics. So just making sure you've got everything written, put together nicely, sent to whoever needs it, and then filed away so you can reference it in the future.
So now we're going to move into a couple more specific topics, and Alessa, I see your question there. We'll address that at the end in the Q&A session, if that's okay. So first we'll start out with contracts. It's kind of, as a producer, the building block of a show. Everything that you are doing is going to involve a contract, but I want to be clear about why we need them, because a lot of people think of contracts as a legal tool, but when we're talking about the low financial, like there's not a lot of money involved in theater productions usually.
And when we say not a lot of money, we mean like under 10,000. So what might be a lot of money to us, you know, putting 5,000 of your own money into something is a lot of money, but in like the grand scheme and in legal things.
Right. So to give some context, the average cost of bringing something to court in a legal context is going to be about 100,000. So when you're talking about not a lot of money, under 30,000, it is almost never worth doing anything legal. So I don't want to say
suing. It's almost never worth suing, taking someone to court.
So therefore, it's not to say that contracts are useless. They're still very useful in a way to build a team, to build understanding, and to communicate amongst your team. So you generally, I mean, what they're there for is to lay out everything that you can think of happening.
So we're getting distracted because our puppy is crying in the background.
What your responsibility? Why don't you go get her some water, because that's what she wants.
Okay, I'll be back while Connor talks about contracts.
So, so there, really, you want to lay out the responsibilities of a role or of an agreement, what you expect each person to do with that, what you might think, what would happen if something goes wrong, how you might anticipate dealing with conflicts, how, with COVID now, it's very apropos to talk about what's called a force majeure clause. Force majeure anticipates things that we have no control over. And what happens if that happens? You know, you can put those out before, and what that really does is allows you to not think about it. You know, it's already solved. So you're avoiding conflict. You're resolving conflict before it happens. And you're able to more openly talk about it without getting personal, without getting emotional, because you're now talking about a business interaction. So you have contracts for your venue. That's probably going to be the biggest one that you work with, the one for the most money. And you want to make sure that in all of these situations that you're reading the whole thing. You should know every single clause. You should read them intimately and understand things like, for a venue, when you have to pay, when you're allowed in, how many people
are needed for a load-in.
Yeah, the technical requirements of the theater. Those sorts of things can come back and bite you. And if you don't understand up front, it's very easy to go into something and talk about what you need and set that out beforehand. It's very hard once things are happening to go back and say, oh, I meant to do this. Oh, I wanted to do that. It's always better to lay it out for at the start. And by having a contract in place, then you've done that, and you can always refer back to it. Unions are a whole other, you'll also, as a producer, you will want to produce contracts for every member of your team, all of your actors, and basically anybody that you interact with, even if it's very small. A contract can be, I mean, the one I sent you is lengthy. That has everything that you would need to consider, really. But they can really be one page. They can say, this is what you're going to do. This is when you're going to do it. And this is what how you'll be compensated, which can be in money or in a free ticket or whatever it is.
Yeah, you just need that plus your names, date, and a witness, and you've got a contract.
So then unions are another consideration which most of us will get involved with, but they have form contracts. They have other considerations that you need to consider. So we'll move on now to schedules.
Okay, I'm gonna pass Frances here to her daddy. She's being a fuss. Apologies for that. Okay, scheduling. If you don't have a good schedule, you are going to have a hell of a time putting on a show. There is so much to do. I don't know how people do it without calendars. I've seen them try. You need a production calendar. Personally, I recommend Google, but you can use anything. I mean, you could write it by hand. I'm sure there's lots of different online ones. I've been using Google Calendar since high school because it's really easy to color code, to schedule in tasks. It's really simple to invite people to it. It can be used on any type of phone. You can use it on a desktop. It's just simple, and you can set up to get notifications when something changes. So when I'm putting together a show, the first thing I always do is go in and make a calendar that is my show calendar that I share with everyone that has all of the dates. And I start off by going through and putting in the major deadlines, and you get more specific as you go along. So how much time do you really need to put on a show? This is going to be detailed. I will go over it as quickly as I can. Oh, how do I hide this so I can see? Oops. This is why I'm not supposed to touch the thing. Oops, hang on. Sorry, I have to hide everyone's lovely smiling faces so I can see. Okay, so you start off with your idea. You need to know, as Conor was talking about before, like what your basic goal is. What is it that you want to do? Why, when, who, where? For ease of explanation, I'm going to use the most recent show that I directed as an example. So I wanted to do The Rear Window. It was a movie that I'd always liked. I know it was based off of a short story that was in the public domain, which meant that I could do an adaptation of it for the stage and not have to pay anybody. So that was my first thing. So, okay, I want to put on a stage version of The Rear Window. So I started looking at a budget and timeline. Had to figure out, well, what time of year do I want to do it? We tend to put on shows in the spring. So I thought, okay, it's probably going to be around March. I need to make a budget. What is it that I need for this show? Well, this one was interesting because you needed, for those who don't know the movie, it's a guy who's got a broken leg and stuck in his apartment, and he's watching his neighbors all around him. So to do that, I knew I needed to have a way to have a multi-level set. Knowing that we could not possibly afford to build that, I thought, oh, well, TPM has got,
Theater Pass Marais
has got a balcony that we can use. So I knew I needed it to be that venue. Because of that, some of my timeline was going to be based around when they were free. I messaged them, said, hey, I want to do this show, and found out when they had space. If you're looking at a venue of that size, you're going to need to contact them at least a year in advance. Every once in a while, they'll have, especially around Christmas, you might see, they say, oh, we have a week that's free, and they're doing a discounted thing. So if you're doing a small show or like a little, cabaret or one-off thing, that might work. But if you're looking to do a larger production, expect to have at least 12 months ahead of time be when you reach out to them, say, hey, I want to do this, and pretty quickly follow up with some kind of deposit so that you can save that space. Smaller venues obviously will vary, but if you're not thinking about a show at least a year in advance, you're probably going to have trouble getting everything done. So then we get into the writing, development, rights acquisition. In this case, I was writing the story, so I knew I needed it written. I knew I needed to have the script done before I could hire crew and before I could get actors. I knew if I was going to have my show on in March, I wanted to be casting people in December. We do a longer rehearsal process because we can't afford to pay people for rehearsals. So if you're doing a professional show, you're probably having a 2 or 3 week rehearsal period. We're usually about 2 months. I still get in about 80 hours of rehearsal, but we have it spread out to try and accommodate everyone's schedules. Because I knew there were stat holidays in there, I decided to do the casting a bit early in December, but not have rehearsals start until the new year. So that's something you have to keep in mind too. When different holidays are, if there's other big events, if you're trying to do something that starts in the fall, if your actors are in fringe, they might be busy with some of that. So you have to kind of have all those things in your head when you start to put that together. If you need to apply to get rights from, say, Samuel French or something, You generally need to already have your venue for that. So you do that kind of at the same time as the venue. You're going to say, this is the sort of thing I want to put on. I think I want to do it this time. I think I want this venue. Then you'll reach out, make sure you can get the rights for it, make sure you can get the venue, and it all kind of happens in this crazy, messy, simultaneous thing. Then you need to put together your team. You need your director, designer, stage managers, production manager. So this is why it's important to have already figured out a rough budget, because when you're going to your team, you need to be able to say, this is when I'm looking at doing something, this is what I can pay you, and this is what I thought you could have as a budget. Then ask them, is that reasonable? You know, I do a lot of design, so I usually know how to budget the designs pretty well, except for, what do you want? Except for when it comes to lighting. I know nothing about lighting. So I knew going into this, I need to make my lighting budget on the big side, so that when I went to a lighting designer, I could say, does this work? And they could give me some details and fit it in. When you're talking to your potential team, you need to be figuring out your timelines, your compensation. And once you've got that all figured out, then you can do contracts. So booking a venue, as we said, that's kind of already started, but around the time you're getting your team is when you will be finalizing your venue, signing an agreement, and you're likely going to have to pay a deposit, which is usually between 20 and 50% of the overall amount. Now, if you're looking at a big venue, that can be a large amount of money. And a lot of us can't afford to just pay a lump sum of $1,000. So talk to them, you know, be upfront, explain what you can do, and offer suggestions, offer solutions. Don't just say, I can't afford to pay that, can I pay it later? Say, hey, this is a lot of money for me. Can I give you bi-weekly payments of this, and, you know, propose a specific schedule? I've never had that turned down when I've offered something like that. So go ahead and try. But you should be keeping in mind when you're starting this, okay, if I have to book the venue between 6 and 12 months before, I'm going to need a lump sum somewhere around there. So after you have your venue booked and you've got your crew, then you can reassess and finalize your budget. At this point, you should have signed your contract with the venue, which will lay out all of the different costs. Make sure, as Conor was saying with contracts, that you understand that really clearly, and that you know, for example, a load in, a lot of the time you have like your head tech, and then you need an extra person for while they're hanging lights. And that's an additional fee outside of your like 40 hours of tech that most contracts come with. Make sure you've got a really specific budget, and that you're also planning for some overtime, because undoubtedly something will go wrong. You'll have your department budgets. You'll know what you're paying each of your crew members, and you'll know how much money they can spend on their things. We'll get into later, when we're looking at the budget, how you actually come up with those numbers and making sure that you have a budget that's realistic. But for now, we'll just assume that you know how to do that, and that's something you've done. Then it's time to get into casting. So this will be run mostly by your director, and they may have their stage manager help out with it, but you should still be overseeing things. When I produce stuff, I'm always in the casting room as well. You don't necessarily have to be. If you are, you need to be able to still separate yourself from the director and know that you might have good ideas for things, but it's not ultimately your job to cast. It's the director's job. But you may be responsible for things like booking the audition space, sending out the casting call, and you will definitely be involved in making the offers and signing the contracts. So what'll happen is you'll set up your auditions, you'll run it, the director will say, I want these people. You'll say, great. You will send out the offer saying, we want you to play this role for this much money at this time. They'll say yes or no, and then you'll make sure they get their contracts. That's our pre-production. It's the thing that makes it move forward. Then we get into production. So the first thing you need to do is finalize your schedule. This, so we've got this T minus, so T is the, like the show starting date. And then I lost my weeks thing on there. And then the numbers are how much time before that, if I explained that right. So this is 10 to 12 weeks before the production starts. This is when you need to work out your creative deadlines. Now, this is something you should have considered when you've done your your very first rough schedule. But now you've got your crew together and you can talk to them and make sure you really nail it down. You should have a deadline for when the crew submits their concepts. You should have a deadline for when there are actual deliverables, like if a costume designer, literally, you know, first fitting, when final costumes will be there, and make sure that that is all decided before rehearsal really gets going, because that might be something the director can benefit from in rehearsal. Make sure that the director is involved in these discussions, because maybe you think it's fine for the props to not show up until 2 weeks before the show, and maybe the director's like, I know I need them in the first rehearsal, and the props person needs to know about that, and you can't just spring it on them. And you especially don't want a director who's getting mad at the designers because they're following deadlines that were set up by you, and you didn't bother to check in and make sure that this worked for everybody. So make sure you do that. Rehearsal schedule. Again, I always schedule 80 hours of rehearsal, and we have it spread out, but the schedule is going to depend totally on who's involved. We tend to do like evenings and weekends, but you might have a show where everybody in it is a server, and maybe you do daytimes. That's just a thing you have to work through. The tech week schedule will kind of be happening when you're doing the venue signing, but usually you'll have a deadline set by the venue where you have to have the very specific schedule. That's probably something we could do a whole other thing on, how to do a proper tech week schedule, saying to the venue just, oh, we're gonna come in and then we'll set up the lights and then we'll do the sound. That's not enough. You need like an hour by hour schedule.
Yeah, that is something that if you have a production manager, they may.
Yes, you're a technical director. Basically with all of these, the bigger the production you're doing, the more people you have, and the less specific work you're doing, the more like oversight you're doing. But I'm going to assume for this that it's a small production and you have to do a bit of everything.
And you still need to have the oversight as the producer on all of this, and need to know that it's all has to happen.
Yeah. You will have made up your performance schedule mostly when you first sign with the venue, because you'll know what dates you're doing. But sometimes you do adjust some things, like adding a matinee or something. So you're usually booking like a block of time, not necessarily specific days. So your performance schedule will be firmed up at this point too. And you have to do your marketing schedule, which we're going to start to get into here. So assembling press materials. This again, if you have someone who's heading marketing, it's their job, great. But if not, this will probably fall on you as producer. So 8 to 10 weeks before the show opens is when you need to make sure that you have all of your press stuff ready. That means a poster, graphics. Make sure that you've got them in the right size for all the different, like Facebook has a different size for a group page, your own profile, a company page, an event. All of those are like slightly different size things. You can find all this stuff online. It's simple to do, but it is tedious. I keep a folder of all of my different template sizes so that whenever I'm doing something new, I know I just need to go through and make one of each of these things. And then like every 6 months or so, check it to make sure that they haven't changed. So if you've hired someone to do graphics, make sure that you haven't hired them just to do a single image that you then have to figure out how to fit onto things. They need to make it so that you can have it like portrait and landscape, things that can be cropped different ways. And if they're doing just basic images and then you're doing some of the graphics work, make sure you have the image and the text as separate files. I know it can get into a big thing, but so that you can work through that. Get everyone's headshots and bios. I always ask for them like as soon as we start, because undoubtedly there'll be someone who hasn't gotten it to you until a week before the show. But you want to promote the people in the show, and you're also going to need it to put together your program. You need to write your press release. You're not going to send this right away, but start working on your press release. Make sure you know what it is you want to highlight in there. Then you want to start your online presence. That's why you need your posters and graphics. Figure out if there's a hashtag you're going to use, see if there are people you should be following, people you're engaging with. The main thing to remember with social media is you need to keep it social. If you use it just as free advertising and just put up ads and have nothing that communicates with people, everyone's going to ignore it. But if you put up things that are showing like a personal side to something, are providing some kind of value through like something educational or interesting, people are going to respond to that and they're going to remember. So make sure that you're doing that. And then you want to plan your opening night. We tend to do an opening night gala. Some people have a party afterwards for the cast crew. Maybe they open it up to other people. That might also be when you have VIPs come or press. You don't have to invite the press for opening night. You can invite them later on, but that's something you need to figure out then. Sending out your press release will happen 4 to 6 weeks before the show opens. If you are doing a short run, you should not be sending it out more than 4 weeks before. I know you can get excited and feel like, oh, we need to send this out early so that people will write articles about it. That's not going to happen. They'll ignore it. It'll be forgotten. I've talked to all of the different big reviewers about this specifically and been like, really? You don't need it? No, they don't want it early. So if you're doing only a 1 or 2 week run, then plan to send out your press 4 weeks before. And probably about a week after that is when you want to follow up with some personal things, like pick up the phone and call Glenn Sumi. You're going to have to call him a dozen times, but eventually you'll probably get a hold of him. Then maybe if he's free, he might come. All of these reviewers do want to come and see indie shows, but they're busy, right? So that's why you have to think when you're putting together your initial schedule, what am I competing with here? If you're doing it on your opening nights the same night as a big show at Soul Pepper, like you're not going to get Kelly Nestruck. But if you've managed to sneak into a time where there isn't something else happening and you have an interesting press release, you do have a chance. You just need to follow up. When you send out your press release, make sure that you also have some high-res photos there. If you can get some kind of like production style photos, that's great. If you can't, you can just have pictures of the cast, but make sure you have something that is high quality. And you can have links to things as well. Throughout production, you need to be tracking finances. You need to decide how you're going to distribute funds. If you are going to give people a certain amount of money and they give you back what's left, or if you've got people who are willing to pay out of pocket and be reimbursed, that should be figured out when you're doing contracts. You need to be updating your cash flow regularly so you know exactly how much money is coming in and out. Adjust your budget as you go along, but stick to it. And by that, I mean, if you find out, oh, the director really wants this one thing and the costumes are going to be higher, but the set budget doesn't have to be as high as we originally planned, don't just take the money out of the set and show that there's like an overage in the costumes. Adjust that in your budget lines so that it still matches. Conor will get into that in a bit. Stay organized, keep your receipts, label everything. I always take old pieces of paper, like old scripts, and staple my receipts to them and staple everything together because it gets crazy. And if you're doing design, you often get little funny receipts that don't explain what they are. Make sure that you ask your crew to write, this is the dress and I bought it at this place, and put all of the details you would need on a normal receipt. Overall, you just have to stay on top of it. You should know what's happening in rehearsals. You might go and sit in on some of them. You definitely don't have to, but you should know if there are any problems. You should be looking into how to fix it. You need to be talking regularly with your team. That can be either having weekly meetings, or it can just be, sending them a text being like, hey, how's this going? Whatever works for you, but make sure you're keeping in touch. Ask lots of questions and be ready for problems, and also be ready for emotional problems. And people come and say, I can't possibly do this. And it's your job to say, yes, you can, and help them through it. And make sure that someone is following up with the press, because throughout this whole thing, while you're making sure everyone is doing their job, your main job is selling the show. Sorry, I'm talking so much. Production run and post-production. We'll go through this really quick. Opening night. Is there a gala? If there's some kind of party or anything, there's all of the stuff you have to do going into that, deciding if you need a liquor license, if you're gonna get food. We could do a whole thing on that. If there were VIP invites, if you've invited anyone important to see the show, say big directors or casting agents or something, make sure you treat them like VIPs. Make sure that you were out there introducing yourself, shaking hands, being friendly, talk to the actors beforehand and say, hey, would you be comfortable meeting people, and knowing who is and making sure that they get to meet people. You're the face of the production. So even if you saw it and it was a disaster and you're miserable and think, oh my God, I want this to end, hide it. You're going to deal with it later. You're going to put on a good face and go out there and act like it's great, and make sure people still leave feeling like they had a good time. And make sure you thank your team. Opening night is stressful, even if everything goes perfectly well. So say thank you to everybody. During the show run, you should be tracking the house counts. That's how many tickets are sold. You should be getting show reports from your SM. You solve any problems that come up. Make sure you're keeping people happy. Again, you know, maybe you've got a show that's just not selling well, and you've had people acting to an audience of 2. That can get you down. Find ways to make them feel better. You know, go out as a cast actor to do something, have a movie night, whatever. Make sure you keep people's spirits up, and make sure you're promoting the show. Closing night is more thank yous. Just thank everybody. Then you've got to deal with the strike and the loadout. There should be someone who's in charge. A lot of the time it's your SM, could be a production manager, could be you. You need to know what needs to be returned. Like I mentioned, you need to deal with like garbage and stuff like that. Talk to your venue. They will help you figure out what you need to do. Very shortly after you close, you need to do your reconciliations. If you worked with unions, there may be things you have to submit. You need to put your final reports together, let people know if they've made any money, and pay everyone who you haven't paid. You need to do that right away. And if there is a legitimate reason why you can't pay them on time, let them know that. Do not ignore them and just not respond and be quiet for a month and make everyone angry. Say to them a couple days after the show, this didn't do well. I need to wait until I get paid to pay you. Is it okay to do it at this? And again, just give people a schedule. You know, everybody understands things come up. If you're open and honest about it, you're gonna have a much better time dealing with it. And finally, you can do a postmortem, which is just the name we have for getting everyone together, usually a few weeks after things are done and the dust is kind of settled, to talk really frankly about what went well, what went poorly, and how you can improve in the future. Here comes Francis again. Oh.
So the rest of our time, we'll just talk about budgets. So most of this, we're actually going to switch over to the Excel sheet that I provided.
There it is in the chat again.
You can see the link to download any documents in the chat right now. This is.
What? There you go. Everybody can see that, hopefully. Is it working? Can someone tell us if you can see the budget up on the screen? Jackson, can you see our budget?
It is definitely working.
Okay, it's working?
Good.
Okay, good. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Okay, so Connor is going to go through what this actually is, like the technical side of this and how you put it together. And I'm going to give some examples, and we're going to really quickly do kind of a rough example of here's if we made a show, okay?
Yeah. So you'll see at the bottom there are 5 different tabs. So it's really nice to organize things in tabs, because you can really section things off to know where you need to go to find certain information, and to really cut through clutter. Like if you're showing this to other people, then you might only need to show them what the top sheet is, which just gives a top sheet is just a broad overview of everything that is in the budget. Now, this particular template that I've made has formulas. You can see up here, budget LI7, or anyway. So you don't need to fiddle with this sheet at all. This will automatically fill in as you do everything else. So first, the budget sheet. So this is your planning. And that's really what a budget is
Make it bigger.
it's about planning your show. So the way I've organized this, I have different sections that you need to consider. And then if you go across, you can make your own notes. Then you have this number, X, and dollar, which are just kind of like standard things that you see in a budget. You might see these in other budgets as well. The idea behind these three is that this is the cost. The dollar sign is the cost of what you're buying. The number is how many of that thing you are buying. And the X is some sort of modifier. So that can be any number of things. And we'll get into how that can be used in just a second after I go through everything.
Do you want to go through each one and then I'll fill in the thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So number one is rights and acquisitions. So that can be any number of things. That can be, again, purchasing rights for an already written show. That can be assignments, which if you hire a writer, then there's a certain amount that you should pay them to make sure that you are allowed to put the show on. Anything that involves being allowed to do the show is what rights and acquisitions are. Then you go into script. This may not be necessary if you're doing an already written script, but if you are hiring or bringing on a writer, this is where you would put that in. Now, something that you'll notice in every instance where I have a human being, you have an overview of what it is. This can be changed. Say I'm writing something, then that's not my name. Then you can just write in the name. Expenses are anything that, like if you've promised to rent them a computer for a writer, or if
you're paying for them to get coffee every day, it can be anything. Anything
that is specifically to do with this person, that's what under there. Dramaturgy, that is just a writing consultant. I feel like most people in theater know that. And then you just have these other columns that basically anything else that has anything to do with that section then can go in there. So going down into production labor, I've separated labor and items because there's a few different reasons. One is easier to track just for your own mind, but also because there are sometimes different tax considerations as you get into more complex scenarios, but I won't really talk about that right now. So I've tried to anticipate every position that you might have in any given scenario. Something that is coming up more and more as an intimacy director. That's not something that people might normally think of, but is very important if you're doing any sort of intimate staging, which is different though related to fight direction. So then we get into design labor. I think this is pretty self-evident, but lots of times these roles are filled by, in indie productions, one person is filling multiple roles. Just because a line item is here doesn't mean you have to use it. It's very easy to, for example, just select like this. You see on the left-hand side here, I've just dragged down, and then I right-click, and I can just press delete. And it's gone, and you don't have to think about it again. In the same vein, if you, for example, have two assistant stage managers, you have one here, you can either write to number.
And show what column that is the
That's under the number. And then pay them, whatever, $500.
And explain why the one is there.
All three of these that I talked about, number, X, and dollar, must be filled because it is here that's a formula. So
And the number that's because there's 2 stage managers. The one is the frequency with which they're paid. So they're being paid a flat rate of 500. That's why it's a 1. Then you have the rate, and then that shows what the total will be.
so if you paid them 500 a week over 8 weeks, then you could just put 8 there, and then boom.
Yeah.
But you could also, if you preferred to track them individually, you could right click on the expenses. It's the same for every position here, and just click insert. This might be getting too complicated.
This may be getting too complicated. Chances are you won't need all of these. So even if you didn't need a choreographer, but you have a fight captain, just take out choreographer and write fight captain, right? These here are things you can change. What you don't want to mess with are the number columns, because then you're going to start changing formulas.
Just a quick Excel tip for anybody who's not too, who hasn't used it too much. One of the easiest things to make things quick that you can possibly do, if you select a cell that has a formula in it, and you want that same formula to apply again in cells below, this little tiny box there, you can grab it, it changes your mouse cursor, and just drag it down. And then the same formula will happen again. So you see up here at the top, it says E57 times F57 times G57. And now this has just moved everything to 58.
Because, oh, you can't see me pointing.
Because 58 versus 57.
Yeah.
So if you do want to add additional things and want that formula to keep going, then that's what you do. These totals will automatically be updated because it's a box that will move with when you add things in.
And maybe just explain quickly that when he had it highlighted on the total there, how did you make it show what the formula is there?
I just double click on a box and it'll show me what my formula is referencing.
Yeah, so if you have something adding up and you think this doesn't seem right, just go and check that. Make sure you haven't missed something in the formula there and that everything is adding correctly.
And you can read the formula, it'll color code it. And then one thing that's important, don't just click off, because clicking off will add something to the formula. You press enter or return. At a later time, I'll do one of these that's a bit more about like actually how I built this, so that you can, if you want to understand how some Excel formulas and that sort of thing. So again, we have design, labor, then we get into the things rather than the people. So the venue, the set, the props, the costumes. Again, you can rent or purchase. You can build, or there's so many different ways to do this, and I've tried to incorporate that. It all it is always manipulable, but like for construction, it's a bit more interesting because how do you judge construction? Do you say, oh, I need 20 pieces of wood? Generally not. Generally, for these more overview sections, you would put, I need one set constructed one time, and it's going to cost me $2,000.
Yeah, because this is the producer's budget. Your designers may decide to make their own with this and go in it and literally be, this is the cost of my wood, this is the cost of yada yada. That's not something you necessarily need to break down. And the other thing, just with rentals and purchases, rentals obviously are, no, how do I want to say this? Some of these will have deposits and things that will go in and come back. That's why you need to follow your cash flow. Don't tell yourself, oh, well, that's not money we're really spending, and leave it out. Make sure you always put those things in, because it's still money you have to come up with at some point, even if it's something that you're going to get back. And you want to budget, assuming you're not going to get it back in case something terrible happens and your costumes are destroyed. You don't want to unexpectedly be out $500.
Insurance is something that every venue requires. As a general rule, most venues in the city require $2 million of general liability insurance. As long as you know that, you don't need to know the specifics of that. The best place to go, quickest and sometimes the cheapest. There is one other that is sometimes cheaper depending on the show, but Front Row Insurance is by far
They're very helpful.
the easiest to work with. They are the only place in the city that solely specializes in arts and entertainment industries, and they can help answer all of your questions. They're very nice people.
Yeah. And even though 2 million sounds like a terrifying number, we usually pay what, $250 to have it insured for a few weeks?
Yeah, so $250 is usually what we pay for 2 weeks. If you go longer than that, it goes up like a month, but it goes up slowly. You can also, if you have a company, it's about $800 to $1,000 to just get it for a year.
Yeah.
So
if you're doing multiple shows, that can be worth doing.
and then you have your performance. Now you see, I have, obviously this is a good example of where you might want to add things in, because every show has a different setup of how their actors are actually laid out. It's more, if you're using union contracts, it's more important to separate them by lead, principal, supporting. That may not apply to your show, and it may not matter at all, and you may just want to list them and it doesn't matter at all. Fringes is, again, a union thing that would be paying royalties or buyouts. If any of you are actors, you probably have been the beneficiary of buyouts, but most unions require that actors be paid a percentage of future profits, or you can pay those all up front. Most people, we've never actually had to deal with fringes in our
It's more if
theater
you're working on like a new show,
Mhm.
like Come From Away might be a good example. They worked on that for years, right? And the people who were involved in the initial workshops and everything likely had something like that, or they might have had like a first right of refusal or something. So if you're putting together a new show that you think, I'm going to take this and turn this into the next Come From Away, then those are things you need to consider. If you're thinking of this as like a one-off production, that's probably not going to come up.
I guess this is as good a place as any to mention, if that is your situation and you think that this could be bigger, if something starts feeling over your head bigger, ask for help, because there are plenty of resources. One that I've worked with before through my law education is called ALAS, the Artist Legal Assistant Services. They offer 30-minute consultations for free, and are currently trying to build a legal support system for artists. If you ever are like, this feels weird, this feels wrong, this feels like it's getting over my head, ask either of us. We'd be happy to reach out. Ask somebody who you respect in the industry and say, listen, this is something that I just need help with. Lots of people are really nice.
On Facebook too. There's a production resources group on Facebook. Yeah, where there's lots of people. I mean, don't just take everything as gold, as people's opinions, but that can give you an idea of where to start, and let you know if you need to go and like consult with a lawyer or somebody.
Yeah. And then marketing, as I said, one thing that people often either forget about or put too little in. The gold standard is that 10% of your budget goes to marketing, and you can allocate that however you think your market will be best satisfied. Again, it's about communicating a message to an audience, and that's how you want to make this up. So I've given, again, some suggestions, mostly what you're going to get. So print would be more like print you're sending out, or print advertising. On location would be more like a poster on a window. Miscellaneous would be where you put every other thing that you can think of. You cast gift.
You have to buy the crew pizza because it was a terrible day and they loaded in the rain. You know.
Contingency is something that is also often forgotten about in a budget, especially for smaller budgets. In this template, it's automatically calculated, so you don't have to worry about that. But you can adjust how much of a contingency. So what a contingency is just a percentage of the total budget that you account for, but you for the problems that come
It's
up.
wiggle room.
Wiggle room. So if you're looking at raising the funds for what to spend on something, then you need to raise your contingency. But in a perfect world, everything goes perfectly right, and that becomes part of the profit. That can just be transferred. So again, then you see, I'll explain these.
Do you want to just quickly show them if they want to change what percentage? Say you want to do only a 5%.
So if you only want 5%, you just write 5, hit enter, and apparently I
did something wrong.
Excuse me, I'm just changing this quickly, and I will send
We'll
this out
update
again.
it again.
There you go. Now it automatically does it.
There you go.
My apologies. So, so that's the budget.
So let's look at just a couple questions here. So ALAS is artists legal. Connor's typing in the chat. Artist legal advice. You can't type. Advice services. We'll post a link to that on our Facebook and stuff afterwards as well, because they're, especially since they're trying to build their site, this is a great time to reach out to them and talk to them, because they really do want to help.
They do want to help. They have 6 lawyers who do a once a week, basically, after it's in the evenings, they do 30-minute advice sessions. It's not legal advice, it's instruction on how to solve a problem, basically. It's very different, like when you're talking to anybody in the legal field, you'll often hear something like somebody saying, this isn't legal advice, but that's because if a law professional gives you what is considered legal advice, then they have a certain liability.
Yeah.
And so
it doesn't mean you can't trust it. It's
if you ask questions more generally and not as a, can you advise me as a lawyer, lawyers are often very willing to give you just general advice, and that is not specific to your problem, but will solve your problem anyway. They're very good at talking around.
And then just quick, I saw someone, I'll say the detailed breakdown is what we need. Could you just, oh, here, maybe that's okay. Can you repeat the breakdown of the number? Yes. Okay, so first up, the insurance company is Front Row Insurance. So I'll make a note that we'll post both of those as well. Front Row and Alas we'll post links to.
And NAS, so I'll go back up to the ASM here.
Yeah.
So what I was saying is, I'm just going to delete that because we didn't really talk about that. So if you have, so in my notes, I'm going to write, I have 2 ASMs for paid weekly, right? So that's what that's what the situation is. I have 2 ASMs paid weekly, and I'm paying them $500
a week.
A week. There are 8 weeks that I need them. So that's the X, and there are 2 of them. So this is the number of things. So E corresponds to C, if that makes sense. I'm looking up here in the columns. So E corresponds to C, the number of those. F is the number of periods in which a payment must occur. And then G is the amount of the payment.
Yeah. So in most of these cases, the F column is just going to be 1. Even with paying people, a lot of the time in indie stuff, you're not paying on a regular basis. It's a flat rate. So if you were paying them a flat rate of $500, then instead of the 8 there, it would be 1.
Then I would probably write 2 ASMs flat rate.
Yeah.
And write 1.
1, because they are paid one time. Make sense? Okay. I think we should look at revenue projection.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go through quickly the way that I do my revenue projection to figure out the budget. So the trickiest thing about budgets is that you have to kind of make a budget and do your revenue projection at the same time. I realize we're sort of coming up to the end of this. For anyone who's come in later, if you need to leave, that's fine. We're going to keep talking. We're going to upload this all afterwards. So if you miss anything, you'll see it, and feel free to email us at any time. It's the TITC@gmail.com. We'll also post that. We'll get back to questions as soon as we can. Right now I'm going to go through, and there are many ways to do revenue projections. This is by no means the gold standard, but this is what I've been using for the past 5 or 6 years. So you want to start off with what your venue capacity is. That's just literally, thank you, how many people can fit in the venue. So let's say we have 100 capacity. Sometimes you need to reserve some space for volunteers. It's usually 2. So let's say that there's 2 people there. And then you may also have to reserve some for accessibility. So let's say they take out 2 seats to make room for a wheelchair. So now the maximum number of people that we can have in our venue is 96. So that's what all of the rest of this is based on. So
That's the total.
that's the total. What total?
That should...
Yeah, ignore that thing. Okay, so ticket pricing. The best way to figure out what you're going to price your tickets as is to start by looking at what other people are charging. Don't look at a Mervish thing and say, well, they can charge $200 and think that you can charge $200. Look at the venue that you're in and look at what people have charged to be in there. That said, it's not uncommon for indie groups to undercharge because they feel like, oh, well, we're just a little thing. And you have to be realistic with what it's costing you to put on a show. Sometimes you'll go through this and look at it and realize, oh, this is not going to happen. We can't do it, which is fine too. That's why you do this before you start getting people involved. But let's say for a base price, we're going to say a general ticket is $25. That's a pretty standard on the low end for indie. There's usually discounts for students and seniors. We're going to say that that's $20. Another pretty standard one. When it comes to arts workers, if you are going to offer a discount to equity and you want to be able to advertise it through the eDrive, it needs to be at least 20% lower than what the regular ticket price is, which I think is like $22 for this. We can do a quick math thing. What's
20% of
20% off?
$5.
$5 off. Okay, so in this case, it's also 20. Sometimes it ends up being an odd number. And then you might also have discount codes that you give out. Usually I have some that are as cheap as $15. So let's put in our discount code is 15. These are all pretty low. Any of these could be upped by another $10 and still be in a pretty standard price range, but we'll just go with a low budget one here. Okay, so then there's ticket fees. I personally hate them, but this is a thing that exists in just about everything now. You may decide to put your own ticket fee on. Maybe you're doing all of your ticketing the old-fashioned way, and so you're going to charge $1 in each one and give that money to somebody who's doing it. So let's say that on every ticket, there is a $1 fee that you keep. Then there's often third-party fees. These range so much. It can be, a lot of the time it's like $1 plus a certain percentage. They might also charge a different percent if someone's paying by credit card. I'm gonna say $1.50 is a pretty general ticket fee that again would exist on every ticket. That's something you need to look into when you are doing these. Years ago, we did a show. I won't name the thing we sold it through because it doesn't exist anymore, so I won't bother to badmouth it, but we were selling tickets through something that seemed like a good deal for us, but we didn't look closely at what the ticket fee was. And I later found out that we were selling $20 tickets that in some cases had an $8 fee on it. That's ridiculous. Now, if you're buying something from Mervish, you could easily pay an $8 fee because you're buying a $200 ticket. So make sure when you're looking for where you want to sell your tickets that you're keeping that pricing in mind. And another thing you can consider is you may want to advertise your price is $25, and then when they go to checkout, these added fees will be there. That's pretty standard now. A few years ago, it was probably better to hide that fee into your thing and have a flat rate. but that's just something you have to decide ahead of time. And you need to make sure that you were budgeting off of what your base price is, plus if there's a ticket fee that you're keeping. Okay, so now we're going to look at the number of tickets that are sold by capacity per single performance. So I have broken down there 20% all the way up to 100%. And that is relating to the projections based on number of 96. So 100% of your venue sold is 96 people. If you only sold 20% of the venue, you've only got 19 people in your audience. Then we can look at gross ticket sales value.
And I realize that there's a mistake here that I'll send out a new Excel because these are based on 16 shows in a run. And I can fix it so that
they can put in their own thing. Yeah.
I apologize for that, but
just type that out here now. So if anyone's looking at it, they remember. So what we'll add is as he's putting here is the number of performances. This is because this is the template we used for our last show. So here it happens to be 16, but we'll change it so you could be doing 3 shows, not the same. So gross ticket sales value by capacity, single performance. I like to break these down this way to come up with a better overall estimate, because there's no magic way to figure out exactly what you're going to sell and exactly what you're going to make. So I look first at, okay, what are we likely to sell for a single show? We have broken down there ticket type. If you could just highlight where that is, just here, right? So we've got ticket type, we have our general ticket, and these are all of the, where did we put those? Where are those prices? Oh, that's what's above there with the ticket price breakdown, right? So the general is the $25, the under 30, the senior arts worker, the discount code. Then we have across on the other axis, the different capacities and how much money you'd make per show. So you can look at it and say, oh, geez, if we sold only discount code tickets and only sold 20%, we could make as little as $332 a show. You need to be looking at the numbers on the low end when you're making your budget. Yes, it's exciting to look at, like, you know, the overall projection at the end here. If you sold all your shows out, all of them at the highest amount, you could make $33,000. It's not going to happen. I can almost guarantee you it's not going to happen. So what you really want to be looking at is the 20 and 30% capacity when you're making your budget. And then when you're selling, aiming for like 40, 50% capacity. Now, when bigger theaters do it, they're usually basing on a 50 or 70% capacity sales. For indie theater, the standard is 30. If you're doing a show that feels a little risky or is a lot of money, I would actually budget off of a 20% capacity. The other important thing to remember is I'm talking about capacity, but depending on the size of your venue, that could change. A lot of indie shows are in venues that only have about 100 seats. But if for some reason you've decided to rent out something that has 600 seats, don't assume that you can necessarily sell 20% of that, right? So it's all relative. That gets into a whole other thing. But assuming you're in a smaller venue that's like 150 seats or less, that's probably what you're looking at, is 20 to 30% sales per night. So then we have below that broken down gross revenue based on capacity and ticket type, looking at the full run. So again, right now this is set up for 16 performances.
Which we can now change.
Okay, so we can change to any. So let's just look at 7 performances. You've got a week of a show. And you can look and see different possibilities. So for example, if you sold 20% through the whole thing, but you only sold seniors arts tickets, then you're going to be making just under $3,000. If you manage to do well and sell more like 40%, but they were all the discount tickets, you could sell that much. So this is where experience really comes into it, because this is a lot of numbers that obviously range from about 3,600 up to 14,000. I know from experience that we're going to sell probably about 20% of our tickets are going to be the seniors arts workers. We also, seniors arts workers projected, right? We do actually sell the majority of them at general price. We always do an early bird discount that very consistently sells about 20 tickets, regardless of capacity or anything. We usually sell about 20 early bird tickets. So the more shows we do, the more specific we we can get. When you're just sort of guessing, I usually look at the low end and say, okay, well, let's say we're going to sell 20%. I don't know if we're going to sell them all as a general thing. We're probably going to sell, you know, some under 30, some general. And what is this actually based on right now? 34.
Yeah.
What was so this, the projection down here is the average.
It's actually, sorry, it's the weighted average based on projected sales.
Yeah, it gets a little complicated. But that's your projections here are what you would likely make as a mix of these different types of tickets, depending on these capacities. Then I look at that and say, well, we're probably going to sell between 30 and 40%. And I usually sort of work out a number that's somewhere in there. This is actually maybe a little higher than I would say. I would probably say, looking at this, that we make around $4,000. Again, that's like, I can't give you a specific way I did that. It's just looking and knowing, well, we get a little bit more here, a little bit less. So if you're not sure, always go on the low end. You know, if you look at this and you fill it out and go, God, I have no idea, say, okay, what's the least we're likely to make? We should at least sell 20% capacity. If you're under that, you've got a whole other problem. The lowest price tickets are $15. So let's set our budget at $2,327. That's how much we're confident we can make. So that's the most we want to spend. Then you take that number and go back to your budget, and you'll start filling all of these in and get to your budget at the end. And hopefully it will match or be less than your revenue projection. Now, we had been going to go through and put in some specifics for that, but we're already past our time. So I think what we'll do is we'll set up another one of these where we do an example one. And you know what, if you're a TITC member and you have a show that you want to do as the example, instead of us just, you know, pulling numbers out of thin air, message us and we will pick somebody to use as the example one so we can do a specific budget.
I will give just a 2-minute explanation of the expense and revenue streams here.
Make that a little bigger.
So these obviously look very empty right now because these are real expenses. So when you get a receipt or a contract that says how much you're going to spend, you're just going to fill this out. And very important in the expense section is that you'll see this little drop down menu in category. So I've set it up so that it's a drop down of your different expenses in the budget. And it's important to use those exactly as the category, because it'll be very useful for your tracking. So just to show you how that works, I'm going to go into Assistant Stage Manager because we entered something in there. And then I'll just put fee here. Vendor is the ASM. Description is fee. And then you'll have probably
so say $200 you're paying them.
$200.
And they have an HST number, so they're getting 13% on top of that.
So that's equals. And then the total is there. So I think I actually set it up backwards, but it doesn't matter. So
we'll fix it and then we'll do one just explaining this budget thing.
So now you have $226 that you spent on your Assistant Stage Manager. If we go back to our budget and look now at what's happened to the Assistant Stage Manager. So we had budgeted 1,000. We spent, you see up here, spend and variance. We spent 226, which means that we are $774 under budget so far.
Which is why it's nice and green.
Now, if that same expense was actually
$1,000
or 2,000, we overspent. Now we go back to our budget and we're 1,260 over budget. And that will also reflect over here in the top sheet where you have total budget, total spend, projected revenue, total revenue. These sorts of things will show you where you're actually sitting. So in this case, we've projected that we're going to have a profit of $1,200. What we've actually had is an expense of $2,260. So our variance,
is a loss.
It's well, this is the real loss. This is how far we were off.
Yeah.
The revenue is the same thing, but you can make up your own categories. That's not going to be as important. That can be anything from fundraising to ticket sales to whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so I think now we're going to switch to questions. If you've got specific questions about how this Excel sheet works, we're going to leave those for now because we will set up another one of these either to do as a Zoom.
I'd still like to know what your questions are so we can tailor the...
we'll make notes. Okay, so ask whatever you want and we'll tell you if we can.
And comments too. Did you like this? Did you hate it?
Did we talk too much? I'm sorry, I know I do talk a lot. We're trying to cram in a lot of information. So you can put it in the text or you can attempt to come on and speak too. Thank you for everyone saying that's making sense. That's good. I'm glad. That's helpful. Was there anything, knowing that we purposefully left out funding, other than that, was there anything that you were like, I can't believe they didn't talk about this? Will I see if someone's typing? I need my little ... Okay. Or was there anything that you thought we were wrong about? We'll say again, we're both indie producers. We do have experience. That doesn't mean like we're far from experts. If you've heard conflicting things, let us know that, sometimes there are two conflicting things that are both true, or maybe we're wrong.
Thank you, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, funding and grants. Okay, grants is not something that we should really talk to because we haven't had a ton of.
No, we can talk about what grants are available.
Yeah.
And in general, what they're looking for.
I think with grants, there are some people who've done some good workshops though. So maybe what we'll do is try to put together a list of other resources that go over some of that stuff. When it comes to funding, we could maybe do one on sponsorship.
Yeah.
Again, it's really hard when you're a small group. That's why the TITC exists. Our long-term goal is to become a charity and to have our own kind of funding that we can disperse amongst people. That's still years away. It's when you're a small company or if you're putting on a one-off show, the reality of it is any money you fundraise is likely to come from your close friends and family. And you can only ask for that so many times. So be picky. If your friends ask you to help produce a show, great, go for it. But if they expect you to use all of your personal connections and kind of, bleed them dry of anything they might give you, make sure it's something that you are willing to do that for. I've now been doing this long enough. My family all knows I do it. I can't call up and be like, can you give me money for my show? So they're like, what, you haven't figured this out by now? But when you're doing something for the first time and you give a big push, you're a lot more likely to have success.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing about grants before we move on to Quentin's question. I was taught one course by the manager of OAC theater grants, and it's great to get insight from people like that. And usually actually grant officers, if you have an idea for what you want your show to be, like if you're like, this is what I want to produce, grant officers are there to help. You can email them and call them, schedule a call and say, I just want to talk about it. I want to make sure that this is appropriate for your program. They'll often advise you of how to word it, because honestly, it is people assessing it, but they have directives. They're a government organization. They get money to disperse for specific things. In Canada, right now, the focus is on diversity and on Aboriginal stories and on marginalized groups. And they are going to consider that at in how they fund it. They look for various good stories, but they definitely have check boxes that they want to make, and they do prioritize things. So again, that can be a whole other thing. We personally haven't gone the grant route, so we're not the best people to talk about it. But
ask them and not near deadlines. You know, the deadlines are easy to find if you go on Google, and make sure, you know, maybe right after a deadline has passed, call them and say, hey, what were you looking for with that, and plan ahead, because the more time they have, the more they'll help you. These are all people who are doing this job because they love the arts and want to see funding. So I know people get really stressed about writing grants, and it feels like you're, you know, submitting something to a mean teacher or boss, but that's not what it is. So just reach out.
They want to give everybody money.
Yeah.
Okay. So Quentin asks, what's the ideal show schedule? So that's during the production time. So should there be dark days basically, or should it be every night?
Yes. So standard is Mondays are dark. A lot of theaters will actually charge you extra if you want to do a show on Monday. There's almost no reason to do a show on Monday, so I would always leave that dark. If you're a small company, Tuesdays are also a hard sell, so a lot of the time those are left dark. When we first started and I was only doing like 6 show runs, I would do a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I'd throw in some matinees. It depends a lot on your audience. Like if you can manage to get student matinees, it's a tricky thing to schedule. That again is a whole other thing, but if you can manage that, they're gonna want a midweek matinee, so you might do a Wednesday matinee. Seniors, if you think you're gonna get a lot of seniors, you're gonna get a Saturday or a Sunday matinee. So you might want to add those. But if you're thinking that you can't afford to be in the theater every day, I would skip Sundays. You almost never do a Sunday night anyway. You might do a matinee. I'd skip the Sunday, I'd skip Monday, Tuesday, and possibly even Wednesday, and stick to the weekend times. But of course, it depends on your show, it depends on your demographic, it depends on the rules at the theater, and it depends on holidays. Sometimes we've had kind of a strange schedule. School holidays as well. If you've got something that could appeal to kids and you're doing it over March break, you may want to do a Tuesday through Friday run and market it specifically as that.
We have generally gotten good responses on Saturday matinees. So even if you're doing a small run, throwing in Saturday
you want at least one matinee, I think, unless it's like specifically some kind of like strange doing it like a dark thing at night or something. Put in a matinee, because there will be people who don't want to go out at night. Be cool.
Be concise when effective when developing your project, knowing what details creative
times. We think we should focus on the creative side and practical side that may be holding us back from completing the finished project. So how to be really concise and effective when developing your project. Do you mean like the creative development? That again could be a whole other thing. Being concise with this, I guess you have to you have to ask yourself 2 things. Why are you doing a project, and why is anyone going to want to see it? And it hurts to hear, but just because it's something that you want to do doesn't mean anyone wants to see it. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make early on, where it's like, oh, I really want to do this and I want to be the star and I want to be great. And maybe it would be great, but that doesn't mean people want to pay to come and see it. So that's where having a producer comes in, especially if you find you're not like analytically minded like that. If you want to make something and you're like, I desperately want to do a one-woman show about my life, great. Go and talk to a producer and say, this is what I want to do. Why would anyone want to see this? And they can help you figure it out. You know, see what sort of, is it funny? You know, is it like a comedy thing? Is it something that's going to tell like an unusual story people don't know? And you figure out those and then go through as we did and work out your different goals.
So I think, if you are planning on self-producing your own show and you're trying to consider as you're writing what things are totally outlandish and are like very hard to pull off and very expensive to pull off, I actually don't know, like if you want to consider that, the best thing to do is to research as you go how much it would cost to do something. If you have that feeling that something is weird, But if you are like, I mean, this isn't a creative workshop, but like when you're, I think that it's important to, what I said before about understanding the why you're writing it and what you're trying to communicate. Like you have to think of why and how to communicate something, and then just do the thing that most effectively does that.
And just keep asking questions of people. Again, on Facebook, a group called Production Resources Toronto is a great group of people, but like do your homework first. Don't go on and just say, what's it cost to rent this kind of light? Because they're going to bite back and say, Google it. But if you say something like, I want to do this sort of thing, but I don't know if there's a market for it. Has anyone seen something like this before? You're going to get a good response.
Yeah. So when you say how to cut costs, the things that are easier to cut costs, obviously taking on more responsibility yourself cuts off the biggest cost, which is people. Doing something black box or more experimental without a set, that's going to cut costs. Props can be surprisingly expensive. So if you can, the way that you develop something with or without props should be a consideration. And then costumes as well, like those practical things, and the way that you conceive lighting. It's much cheaper to have a general wash than it is to have,
not having to change, like if you're in a venue that comes with a standard setup, not paying to change the lights, because that takes like 8 hours. That's a huge cost. Don't beware, because some venues start with nothing and you have to pay regardless. Also being careful of consumables. So, you know, if you're doing a show where someone is like eating, those things add up so fast. And I don't just mean consumables in terms of food, but also like if there's blood, if there's paper that gets ripped up, anything that has a one-time use adds up really, really fast. So look for creative ways to do that.
I think those are general things, but if you have specific questions, like we're both open to receiving emails. If you have something that you're like, hey, I have this and I feel like this is going to be really expensive, then ask somebody who's produced before, ask somebody and just say like, listen, this is my concept and I'm worried about this. And people are really, I think for the most part, if you're respectful of their time, they're willing to open up and help you.
Yeah. And just a final thing on that, your number one cost is almost certainly the venue. So do look for, if you have something that can be done in a venue like the Assembly Theater is an affordable space. It has some downsides that you wouldn't have at a larger theater, but it doesn't necessarily cause a problem for your show. You know, like depending on what you're putting on, maybe you don't need a big lighting grid. Maybe you don't need a really big audience space. And so look for those non-conventional spaces, and then do a shorter run too.
That's true. Shorter run is a huge, which is a great, so Nas question is the next one. Probably the last one, and then we'll let you guys all go because we've been going for 2 hours now. Is it possible to start a budget without securing a venue? And how do you get a rough number for an initial budget without knowing seat capacity if you don't have a venue yet?
Research. Go to spacefinder.ca. Is it?
Yeah,
it's not updated as well as it used to be, but that's somewhere to start. This is another thing where you can, like a lot of the bigger venues, if you just Google them, you can find a breakdown of what their rental costs are, or you can shoot them an email if you don't see that. You need to have an idea of what kind of venue you want, because there's a big difference between booking out, you know, the Young Center versus Assembly.
I think the first question you have to ask yourself when you're trying to budget a venue is, what is the venue that the show requires? So rather than seeing like what venue is available and how many seats does it have, you're thinking like, is this a one-person show that can be done in a black box? Is this a, you know, all of our shows have like Rear Window, for example, that we did specifically required that we have, if anybody's seen the film, a bunch of windows that you can't fully see into.
Yeah,
so we
that's a
needed
good example
larger, a larger space to realize that. So you start by asking what the show needs, and then you have to just do the research and see what venues exist like that. There's generally, almost every venue in Toronto is between 2,000 and 4,000 a week for indie venues.
For the small venues,
For anything
for
under
professional
200,
ones,
you're looking at no more than, I think 6,000 is the highest I've seen, which is
oh no, it can go up to 10,
for under
definitely.
200.
I mean, I don't know if this is current. I know years ago I looked at Heart House and it was 10 grand a week. But these things are available online. And just back to Rear Window for a second, that was a good example of one where knowing what the show needed, because I wanted to have different levels. I knew I either need to get into TPM that had that already built in, or we'd have to build it. So a very quick budget of, well, what would it cost to build something like this? And hiring someone who has the expertise to build something safely meant that even though TPM cost more than the venues we used in the past, it was way cheaper than building a set like that. So I knew right away, okay, it's basically TPM or bust. And we wouldn't have done that show that year if we couldn't have gotten that space. Whereas when we did something like Loot, we wanted a big stage and full lighting, but we could have done it at a Key, we could have done it at TPM, we could have done it at Tarragon. We ended up doing it at Alumni because it was the least expensive.
Yeah, so some good just like tips on venues. Alumni is probably the least expensive, but you get the least service. A Key,
and least expensive for a traditional theater.
Obviously, places like Assembly Theater on Queen Street, which is run by Luis Fernandez, great little space. Red Sandcastle. Those are two great indie venues that will negotiate with you, that will help you, they're great intro spaces. They're both, I think, around 70 seats.
Yes.
But then you can also look at non-traditional things, like if you can do a site-specific thing. Campbell House Museum is very open to doing new and different ideas.
Gibson House has done stuff. Some churches.
Artscape has a variety of different places that you can put something on.
And bars. The Imperial, Monarch. It totally depends on the type of show you're doing. Okay. That was very long. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for listening to our long thing. Feel free to keep sending us questions. We're going to make a few little changes to the, thank you everybody, to the budget template here to make sure that works. And we're going to schedule either another one of these, or we'll just do a video where Conor explains the budget in a bit more detail. And then let us know if you'd like the same thing done for the contract. Take a look at it, see if it's self-explanatory, and if a few people are like, then we'll do one for that as well.
Yeah, the updated budget will be in the same Dropbox that will...
just give it half an hour and then go ahead and take all the files and everything will be updated. If you liked this, be sure to follow us on social media, the TITC. Look at our website and consider joining as a member. You can join as a company or an individual. That's all outlined there. There are no membership fees. It's just about basically assigning sort of a pledge that agrees to help other people in our group. So there's not really a downside to it. Take a look. If you are interested in running a thing like this or have ideas for what you'd like to see us do, let us know. It's a new initiative that is primarily run by the two of us right now, but we can always use help. So if you want to get involved, let us know. And if you can, we do also have a GoFundMe that we're going to share on the things. If you have a couple dollars you can spare, that money goes back into paying for like the website, paying for the Zoom membership. We do all the stuff volunteer, but there are costs associated with it that just come out of pocket. So if you can make a donation now or in the future, that's great. Or just sharing the link to that is helpful as well. Thank you very much. We will hopefully see you again. Have a great time. Stay healthy, stay happy, stay safe. Bye for now.